Every year, on the same rain-soaked day, Elias Monroe made the same solitary pilgrimage to Blackthorn Cemetery. No bodyguards, no sleek limousine, no cameras trailing his steps, just a man cloaked in grief, his heart heavy with the weight of loss. This year, the fourth since his granddaughter Sadie June was stolen by a merciless tumor, was no different. The world knew Elias as a billionaire, a titan of Nashville's skyline, untouchable and cold. But today, in the shadow of crooked stones and whispering oaks, none of that mattered. Today he was just a grandfather, carrying a dogwood blossom and a wound that time couldn't heal. The Tennessee sky bled crimson over Blackthorn Cemetery, a forgotten sprawl of crooked stones and gnarled oaks, tucked in the shadow of Nashville's glittering skyline. Rain clung to the air, a fine mist that coated everything in a mournful sheen. Elias Monroe stood at the cemetery's iron gate, his silhouette stark against the fading light. No bodyguards shadowed him, no sleek Bentley idled nearby, no reporters clamored for a quote. Just a man in a grey wool coat, his silver hair damp and plastered to his forehead, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Today, on the fourth anniversary of his granddaughter's death, he wasn't the real estate titan who'd reshaped Music City with his $39 billion empire. He was just a grandfather, broken and raw, carrying a grief that gnawed at his bones like rust. 4 years ago, Sadie June Monroe, his 7-year-old granddaughter, was stolen by a glioblastoma, a brain tumor that burned through her like wildfire. The world saw Elias as untouchable, a penthouse on the Cumberland River, a private jet parked at Teterboro, a name that opened doors from Wall Street to Dubai. But here, in this desolate cemetery where cicadas wailed and the earth smelled of decay, his wealth was a cruel joke. He came to lay a single dogwood blossom, Sadie's favorite, on her grave, to whisper apologies to a headstone that stared back in cold silence. The path was a jagged scar through the cemetery, roots twisting through the dirt like veins. Elias walked slowly, his polished boots sinking into the mud, each step heavier than the last. His eyes traced the ground, avoiding the moment he'd face her name etched in granite. Sadie June Monroe. Our brightest star. Forever loved. The words were a blade, slicing deeper each year. The cemetery was nearly empty, save for the distant scrape of a groundskeeper's shovel. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the earth itself held its breath. He reached her grave, a small plot choked with ivy and fading wildflowers. Elias knelt, his knees grinding against the wet earth, and placed the dogwood blossom at the base of the headstone. Its petals trembled in the drizzle, fragile and fleeting, like Sadie had been. The silence was a weight, crushing his chest until breathing felt like a betrayal. He didn't cry, tears were a currency he'd spent long ago. His face was a mask carved and unyielding, but inside his heart churned, a storm of guilt and loss that refused to quiet. A rustle broke the stillness, sharp and out of place. Elias's head snapped up, his pulse spiking. Across the grave stood a girl, no older than 9, her thin frame swallowed by a patched denim jacket, the sleeves dangling past her wrists. Her sneakers were caked with mud, laces frayed to threads, and her dark curls spilled from a tattered ribbon, slick with rain. In her hands, she clutched a chipped ceramic bird, its blue paint peeling like old skin, held so tightly her knuckles gleamed white. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at Sadie's headstone with an intensity that made Elias's breath catch. Who is this kid? He thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. What the hell is she doing here? He cleared his throat, his voice rough but careful, like he was handling something fragile. Hey, he said, standing slowly. What are you doing at my granddaughter's grave? The girl flinched, her dark eyes flicking up to meet his. They were deep, unguarded, carrying a weight no child should know, a grief that mirrored his own. For a moment she didn't answer, her lips pressed tight, rain dripping from her chin. Then, in a voice soft but sharp like a blade wrapped in silk, she said, "I came to see Sadie." The name hit Elias like a fist to the gut. Sadie. She said it with a familiarity that felt like theft, like she'd claimed a piece of his granddaughter he didn't even know existed. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists in his pockets. You knew her. he asked, his tone sharper than he intended, suspicion lacing every word. The girl nodded, her fingers tightening around the ceramic bird. She was my friend, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the rain like a bell. She came to the clinic. Brought me this. She held up the bird, its chipped wings catching the faint light. Said it would fly for me when I couldn't. Elias's mind spun, a kaleidoscope of disbelief and memory. The clinic. Sadie, with her gap-toothed grin and endless questions about why fireflies glowed, sneaking off to a clinic? He thought he knew her, every giggle, every scraped knee, every night he'd tucked her into bed with stories of constellations. He'd framed her crayon drawings, kept her favorite stuffed rabbit on his desk. But this? This was a secret she'd buried deep, a part of her life he'd never touched. You're sure it was her? He asked, his voice low, almost accusing, as if she'd conjured this story to wound him. The girl nodded, unfazed by his tone. She wore a yellow scarf. Always. Said it was her lucky charm. She paused, her eyes softening, a flicker of a smile breaking through. She was right. It made me feel lucky too. Elias's breath hitched. That scarf, Sadie's obsession, a gift from her mother, worn even when it frayed at the edges, flapping like a flag as she ran through his cabin's meadow. He could see her now, twirling in it, laughing as it caught the wind. And she'd shared it with this girl? This stranger, standing here in the rain, clutching a broken bird like it was her lifeline? What's your name? He asked, his voice softer now, cracking at the edges. Juniper, she said, her eyes steady. Juniper Cole. Elias studied her, really saw her. Her jacket was patched with duct tape, her cheeks hollow, her curls matted from the rain. But her eyes, they burned with a quiet fire, a resilience that reminded him, impossibly, of Sadie. His granddaughter, his wild, fleeting star, had touched this girl's life. And he'd been too busy building skyscrapers to notice. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the world holding its breath. Juniper shifted, her fingers tracing the bird's chipped beak, her posture tense, like she expected him to send her away. She used to sing to me, she said, unprompted, her voice cutting through the quiet. Old songs like from those black and white movies. Said they'd chase the bad dreams away. Elias's throat burned. Sadie singing? He could picture her, curled up on his leather couch in the cabin, humming Ella Fitzgerald tunes from his vinyl collection, her voice off-key but fearless. He'd thought those moments were theirs alone, private treasures he'd locked away in his memory. But she'd been giving them away, scattering pieces of herself to strangers. How'd you know her? He asked, his voice rough, almost desperate. He needed to understand, to piece together this fragment of Sadie he'd missed. Juniper's eyes met his, unflinching, rain streaking down her face like tears she refused to shed. I was in the clinic. Cancer. The kind that makes your bones feel like they are breaking. Sadie came every week, sat with me during chemo. She'd talk about your cabin, how you'd build fires and tell her stories about the stars. Said you knew everything. Elias's chest tightened, a vice squeezing his heart. The cabin, his retreat in the Smoky Mountains, where he and Sadie would spend rare weekends, roasting marshmallows, naming constellations. She'd called him her star man, her small hands tugging at his sleeve, begging for one more story. He'd been so consumed with boardrooms and deals, $200 million contracts, international mergers, that he'd missed her slipping away to a clinic, pouring her heart into kids like this one. How long? He asked, his voice barely audible over the patter of rain. Almost a year, Juniper said, her gaze dropping to the grave, the ceramic bird trembling in her hands. Then, she stopped coming. A nurse told me she got sick too. And then, her voice cracked just a fraction, but she straightened, refusing to break. The word sick landed like a stone in Elias's gut. Sadie's tumor had come like a thief, silent and merciless, stealing her in months. He'd fought it with everything, top oncologists, private clinics, donations to research labs across the globe. He'd flown specialists in from Zurich, poured millions into trials. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Elias sank onto a nearby bench, the wood slick and cold. Juniper hesitated, then perched a few feet away, still clutching her bird. The silence stretched, heavy but not hostile, as if the grave between them wove a fragile thread of shared pain. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth and honeysuckle. "She was funny," Juniper said suddenly, her voice slicing through the quiet. "She'd do these goofy dances in the clinic hallway, spinning with her scarf. The nurses would laugh, even the mean ones. Once, she brought me a cupcake with blue frosting. Said she snuck it from your kitchen." Elias's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile fighting through the ache. He could see Sadie giggling, raiding his pantry, her fingers sticky with frosting. He'd caught her once, scolded her playfully for sneaking sweets before dinner. She'd just laughed, throwing her arms around his waist, her warmth chasing away his stern facade. "She never told me," he said, more to himself than to Juniper, his voice thick with regret. "Never said she was going to a clinic." Juniper looked at him, her eyes older than her years. "She said you were busy. Always working. She didn't want to bother you with it." The words cut deeper than the headstone's inscription. Busy. He'd been busy, always busy. Closing deals, shaking hands with men who meant nothing, chasing a legacy that felt hollow now. He'd given Sadie everything: private tutors, trips to Paris, a pony for her 6th birthday. But time? He'd hoarded that, spending it on boardrooms instead of her. What else did she do? He asked, his voice hungry, desperate for more of the granddaughter he thought he'd known. Juniper's face softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through her guarded expression. "She'd read to us. All the kids in the ward. She'd do voices, pirates, witches, talking animals. Made us forget we were stuck in those beds. When I was scared before my worst surgery, she stayed all night. Held my hand, told me I was tougher than any storm. Gave me this." She held up the bird, its chipped beak glinting. "Said it would carry my courage when I couldn't." Elias's eyes burned, the tears he'd buried for years clawing their way up. He could hear Sadie's voice, bright and fierce, weaving stories in the dim light of his cabin. She'd been his storm, his whirlwind of joy, and he'd let her slip away, too busy to see the life she was living. "Who's with you?" he asked, his voice hoarse, glancing toward the cemetery gate. Juniper pointed to a rusted hatchback idling in the distance, its headlights cutting through the dusk. "My mom. She brings me here every month. Says it's okay to miss Sadie." Elias nodded, a spark igniting in his chest. He didn't want this moment to end, didn't want to lose this thread to Sadie's hidden world. "You and your mom hungry?" he asked, surprising himself. "There's a diner nearby. My treat." Juniper's eyes widened, wary but curious. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." The diner, Rusty's, was a relic off Highway 70, its neon sign buzzing like a dying firefly. The booths were cracked red vinyl, the air thick with grease and coffee. Elias, Juniper, and her mother Lena sat in a corner, the hum of a jukebox playing Johnny Cash low in the background. Lena was a wiry woman, her hands calloused from years at a textile factory, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Her diner apron peeked from her bag, a testament to the second job she worked to cover Juniper's medical bills. Elias sipped his coffee, black and bitter, watching Lena as she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Sadie was a godsend," she said, stirring cream into her mug. "Showed up at the clinic when Juniper was diagnosed. Bone cancer. We didn't know who she was, just this kid with a yellow scarf and a smile that lit up the room. She'd bring books, little toys, drawings. Sat with Juniper for hours when I was working doubles." Elias leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. "She never told me," he said, the words heavy with guilt. "Not a word." Lena's eyes softened, lines creasing her face. "She didn't want credit. Never even told us her last name. Just showed up, week after week. When Juniper's treatments got bad, the clinic said insurance wouldn't cover the new meds. Thousands out of pocket. Then one day the bill was paid. Anonymous. I didn't know it was Sadie until after. Elias's breath caught, his coffee forgotten. Sadie's allowance, $1.50 a month, pocket change he'd given her for candy or trinkets. She'd used it to save a life? The thought was a knife, twisting pride and pain together. She paid for it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lena nodded, her eyes glistening. Must have been her. Nurse figured it out later, saw her name on a donor list. She never said a thing. Juniper, picking at a plate of fries, looked up. She told me about your cabin, she said, her voice small but clear. Said you had a porch swing and you'd sit there with her, pointing out stars. She wanted to show me one day but… She trailed off, her fingers brushing the ceramic bird beside her plate. Elias swallowed hard, the memory flooding back. The cabin in the Smokies, its porch swing creaking under their weight, Sadie's head on his shoulder as he traced Orion's belt with his finger. He hadn't been back since she died. The swing was probably rotted now, like everything else he'd let fall apart. Why'd she do it? He asked, his voice raw, directed at no one and everyone. Why didn't she tell me? Lena's smile was sad knowing. Because she saw pain and didn't turn away. That's who she was. Days later, Elias stood outside Mercy Grace Clinic, a low brick building in East Nashville, its walls painted with faded murals of sunflowers and balloons. The parking lot was cracked, weeds pushing through, but inside he knew were kids fighting battles bigger than themselves. He'd never set foot here, never thought to. His world was glass towers and private clubs, not hospital wards. But now he needed to see it, to walk where Sadie had walked, to understand the heart she'd poured out. The head nurse, Clara, a woman with gray braids and a voice like warm molasses, recognized his name instantly. You're Sadie's granddad? She asked, her eyes welling up. Lord, that girl was a blessing. Come, let me show you. She led him to the pediatric oncology ward, a maze of bright posters and stuffed animals, the air sharp with antiseptic. Nurses and volunteers gathered, their faces lighting up as they shared stories. One, a young aide named Tara, pulled out a photo. Sadie, her yellow scarf loose around her neck, reading Charlotte's Web to a group of kids, her voice animated, her hands waving like a conductor. Another, a janitor named Roy, showed a grainy phone video. Sadie teaching a girl in a wheelchair how to make paper cranes, both giggling as the paper tore. She was magic, Clara said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. On our worst days, kids crying, parents breaking, she'd show up with her little bag. Books, stickers, candy. She'd sit with the ones who had no one. There was this boy, Jamal, wouldn't talk after his surgery. Sadie brought him a model rocket, said he'd fly to the moon one day. He smiled for the first time in weeks. Elias's hands shook as he opened a scrapbook the staff had made. Page after page of Sadie, hugging a toddler with an 4, painting rainbows on a teen's cast, slipping a friendship bracelet onto a girl's wrist. In every photo, she was alive, radiant, giving pieces of herself away. He'd missed it all, too busy signing contracts to see the life she'd lived. There's more, Clara said, handing him a folded note, the paper worn soft from handling. Sadie left this for the kids. Said to read it if she ever stopped coming. Elias unfolded it, his heart pounding. Sadie's handwriting, small and careful, danced across the page. Dear friends. If you're reading this, I'm not there anymore. But don't cry. You're the bravest people I know, tougher than any monster. Keep fighting, keep dreaming, keep shining. You made my heart happy, and I hope I made yours a little happier too. Hold on to your stars, they'll carry you through. I love you forever. Sadie. Elias's vision blurred, tears spilling down his cheeks. He pressed the note to his chest, his shoulders shaking. He'd thought Sadie was gone, but here she was in these stories, these faces, this love. She'd built something bigger than his empires, something that lasted. Weeks later, Elias stood at a podium in a gilded ballroom in downtown Nashville, chandeliers casting fractals of light over a crowd of doctors, donors, and families. Cameras flashed, but he didn't care. He wasn't here for headlines. He was here for Sadie. "I'm not here to talk about money," he said, his voice steady but raw, echoing through the silent room. "I'm here for my granddaughter, Sadie June Monroe. She was 7, and she was braver than I'll ever be. She spent her last year giving love to kids who needed it most, kids I never knew about. Today I'm carrying her light forward." He announced the Sadie June Foundation, a non-profit to fund pediatric cancer care, supply toys and books to clinics, and support families crushed by medical debt. But it wasn't just checks. Elias was in deep, visiting wards, reading to kids, planting dogwood trees outside hospitals across Tennessee. The media called it a reinvention, but to Elias it was redemption. He was living like Sadie had, quietly, fiercely, with heart. One evening, in a small clinic in Chattanooga, a boy in a Spider-Man shirt tugged at Elias's sleeve. "You Sadie's granddad?" he asked, eyes wide. Elias knelt, his smile soft. "Yeah, I am." The boy grinned, holding a paper crane. "She said you taught her how to make these. Said you were the best." Elias laughed, a real laugh, warm and alive. "She was the best, kid." Months turned into a year, and Elias's visits with Juniper became a lifeline. He'd bring her books, help with her math homework, cheer at her soccer games in a muddy field behind her school. Lena watched, her tired eyes softening with gratitude. She knew what Elias had lost, and what he was finding again. One afternoon, in his cabin's meadow, now blooming with dogwoods, Juniper sat cross-legged, her ceramic bird in her lap. "Can I call you Papa Eli?" she asked, her voice shy, her eyes searching his. Elias's heart swelled, a warmth he hadn't felt in years flooding his chest. "I'd love that," he said, his voice thick. "More than you know." Juniper wasn't Sadie. No one could be. But she was a spark, a reminder that love doesn't die, it grows. In her courage, her quiet strength, Elias saw echoes of the granddaughter who'd changed him forever. A year later, Elias and Juniper stood at Sadie's grave, the sun warm on their backs, dogwood petals drifting like snow. The cemetery was alive with spring, birds singing, ivy curling green around the stones. Juniper placed a dogwood blossom beside the headstone, her fingers gentle. "Thank you, Sadie," she whispered, her voice steady. Elias knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, tears falling freely now. "You changed the world, kiddo," he said to the grave, his voice breaking but full. "And you changed me." They walked away together, not with grief but with purpose. Elias wasn't the billionaire the world once knew. He was a grandfather, a friend, a man who'd learned that love is the only legacy worth leaving. Sadie's light burned on, in every child helped, every story told, every tree planted in her name. And in the quiet of Blackthorn Cemetery, that light shone brightest of all. If this story broke your heart, don't let it end here. Be someone's Sadie. Show up, give time, share love. A small act, a word, a gift, a moment can change everything. Share this story, and let Sadie's light keep burning.